And that's all my job. And welcome, TIAGO. So I'm happy to have you here. Great. Let's see what you have to say.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you all for attending. It's such a late hour. Well, my name is TIAGO from Visualoop.com, and I'm here to talk with you about a little bit about the history of Visualoop. I don't know if all of you know, it's basically a website that covers data visualization and infographic design on a wide variety of fields: marketing, journalism, big data. So pretty much everything that has to do with visualization and infographic design, we covered. And what makes it so curious, it's because, well, as you will see, it's not the average startup business. It's actually started as a blog, and in these modern days, to talk about the success of a blog is something strange by itself, because not so long ago people were saying that blogs were dead, and with social media everything changed. Well, that's not precisely the case, and I hope that some of the things I'll share here, I was told that the audience is a mix of tech and marketing folks, so I hope some of the lessons that I've learned during this process will be useful at some point for you guys. So I'll start by basically explaining how Visualoop came to be, and afterwards I will share some of those lessons with you guys, and then we can talk about it and you guys can ask whatever you feel like. So basically, I'm from Brazil, so I'm actually Portuguese, but I've been living in Brazil for quite some time. Visualoop started way deep inside Brazil with a 1 megabyte internet connection. And it started at the point where I was sick of my job, big corporate job, with bosses and a ton of employees, and basically I decided to make a shift. All my background, my academic background has nothing to do, this is important, with design, with journalism. I'm actually from travel and tourism management, so really nothing to do with technology. Back until 2009 I was basically invisible at Google's eyes, so really nothing to show prior to that, but a lot of experience working with people. And that's something that proved itself to be essential for such a project, because Visualoop is actually a social media project in essence. By the fact I was so far away from everything that everything was made remotely. So for those of you working with marketing, you perhaps will find some days in a position where you have to work for a brand that has no online presence at all, and you have that challenge of making it visible, not only for the customers, but for potential customers. So I decided back then to take some time off and try to understand, the same way I did for decades in travel and tourism management, to understand how people were behaving in this new environment. It was 2009 back then, so of course we already had social media sites, but all the phenomena, all the explosion around social media was just starting. So at that time, you really didn't have much offering in terms of services, in terms of companies offering consultancy, marketing experts in this area. So it was really a void in that field. And in Brazil, it's even worse, because you really imagine, like, more than half of the companies in Brazil don't even have a website. So to talk about social media marketing at that time was really something out of the box. I decided to try to develop some sort of services in that area, because I rapidly understood that the raw material that you work with in that field is pretty much the same that you work in tourism and hotel management. It's people. It's not about technology. It's not about knowing how to code or knowing how to develop something. It's really about understanding people. And I spent quite some time, like 6 months, trying to understand how people behaved in all different kinds of channels, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Orkut, which was actually a big thing in Brazil back then, and other channels. So I came across a very interesting depiction of how people behave in social media. And if you want to offer something, or if you want to develop some sort of service or product to social media users, you really have to understand how they behave. So basically, this diagram is from a guy called David Armano, adapted from him. He's a very, very well-known consultant in social media, and he's a visual thinker. And he made this brilliant depiction of how people behave. So basically, what you have here is 3 types of social media users. And you'll rapidly understand that you see, like, the entertainer. Most of us are entertainers, so we start using Facebook and we post our photos and videos and so on. So there's a sequence of channels that each one of these types use. And if you think about offering a service to a company, of course everybody wants to be an expert. There's no company that wants to be an entertainer or be perceived as an entertainer from its client. So basically what really impacted me here is that at a certain level, an expert has to have a blog. That's what my point that I want to. So basically, the other 2 types of behaviors, they all share content, and that content is usually produced, if not by them, it is produced by experts. So basically, the experts create the content, and no matter what field, it can be pet shops, it can be dentists, it can be tech. Basically, this is the cycle that you follow. So the expert usually has a blog, then he starts spreading that word on Twitter and then on social networks, sometimes has a podcast, sometimes a video blog, and so on. So basically, what I wanted to pitch for those potential clients is, how can I help you to become an expert in such a new thing called social media? And this really helped me a lot. Of course, as any other rule, there are exceptions, and of course, that if you start thinking about, it's not hard to find people who jump from being an entertainer to an interested, and then afterwards to an expert. But basically, the idea was, okay, I have to have a blog to become, or to understand, or to sell those types of services. And not only I needed to understand the mediums and how people were using it, but I had to understand how people shared information. I didn't have any background on infographic design or information design. What you have here is basically a chart that any of you can see on Google Trends, and it shows the interest throughout time of the search term infographics. So it's a very popular, very easy chart to find on Google Trends. And as you can see, that interest in infographics, it really started to grow back in 2009, 2010. So as I was researching how people were behaving and how were they spreading content, I rapidly came across infographics as something that was really starting to invade all our social media streams. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to have a blog that could collect, or at least gather, some of those infographics. At this point, I wasn't thinking about it as a business or anything like that. I just wanted to, okay, this is a topic that really is becoming mainstream, and I want to understand it as a way of spreading messages, either promotional or news or any other sorts of corporate or not content. Infographics were starting to appear all over the place, and then I decided to create a blog about infographics, because it wouldn't make any sense if I created a blog about me, because when I go to clients, nobody wants to write about me, they want to write about their business. And many times, that business is completely outside what you have learned. I mean, I came from travel and tourism, but if I'm going to work with marketing, perhaps I have to write about or produce content or find content about pet shops or about dentistry or about something else. So the challenge that I proposed myself to do was to create a blog about something that was not my field of expertise. It would be very easy to create a blog about tourism and travel management, but that was not the point. So Visualoop was born as a lab, essentially, a social media lab. And the first post of Visualoop, as you can see, is dreadful. I did it on Tumblr back then. I used the first theme I ever found. Remember, no design skills, no nothing. Just, okay, this is it. Okay, I'm going to do it. That's it. So Visualoop in 2010 was like this. Terrible. But the thing is, it was getting about 50 to 60 new posts every day. So it was ugly, but it had content. And
50 posts a day?
Yes. 50 new infographics at least every day. And that volume rapidly caught the attention of several folks. Not only those interested in seeing infographics, but folks that were actually working with this for quite some time. And so, as time went on, I started, as any other blogger probably does, started to update Visualoop. Still very, like, that kind of thing that you oh, this is a cool theme, let's see if it fits on Visualoop. And I started to do it like that. Time after time, until 2012. At that time, and making a long story short, I managed to have contacts with some of the most interesting people in the field. And those types of contacts almost forced me to have a bit more professional website. So in 2012, I launched Visualoop.com, moving away from the free platform Tumblr, and creating not only an English website, but also a Portuguese website. So I will afterwards go into the whys, but this is just to give you a quick overview of how Visualoop evolved throughout the time. And in 2014, last year, finally, we had the pleasure to join forces with Infogram. One of the contacts that I made during that time, actually interviewed you, Aldis, back in 2012, I believe, or 2013, not sure the precise time, but Aldis and Infogram and other companies and other players in visualization, they were very open to my invitations. So I think probably because I wasn't competing with anyone, I was just a guy that was collecting infographics and offering a digital environment for the community without demanding or trying to pitch anything in exchange. At this point, Visualoop, until this point, Visualoop was just a hobby for me. Okay, my real job was that social media gig, helping out small companies, medium-sized companies, with the lessons that I was learning from Visualoop. So basically, in a nutshell, this is the story of Visualoop, in a sense that in 4 years you go from nowhere to being acquired by a company. And it's by itself, it's an interesting story, since Visualoop, it's not really a product. It's not an app. It's not something that you can do something with it. It's a community. It's a website driven by its community. And this is something that it's really, really important at a time where you have so much easiness of creating solutions. If you have an idea, when you look out for it, there's probably like 10 people with the same idea, and perhaps a company already developing what you are. So to manage to get into a niche and make a community around it, it's really something that can generate a nice story. So basically, we have this notion when we were acquired by Infogram, that our goal now is to be the number one data visualization website. And to be the number one it's a kind of a pressure that you have on you. And if you work with marketing, that's the kind of pressure that you'll probably have from most of your bosses. So I want to be the number one pet shop. It can be from your neighborhood, it can be from a country, but everybody wants to be number one. And it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a very relevant goal. Everybody should want to be number one. But I think that there's still something that we can aim more, and it's more important than to be number one. And at this point, I'm going to share those lessons because I think they help understand that you can have other goals and you can actually make a good work out of it without having to worry about being number one. The first lesson that they are kind of obvious, I believe, but I don't want to waste much of your time with all my explanations. So basically, the first lesson that I learned from all this process is obviously the community. So if you're doing some sort of project, social media or marketing project, think about the community first. Think about what you can add to the community. Think about what is missing in that community. Even if it's the pet shop, you can actually have a community of people who like dogs or cats or whatever, and there's always something missing that you can add, that you can invest, and you can help that community either by mapping all the places where they can adopt dogs or cats or whatever. So it has to be a room, it has to be a place for your ideas to not be only about you. It's about the community, and that's how you can actually grow on an organic level. Hard work is very respected on the internet. This is a very important lesson, and sometimes we get a bit demotivated with these types of projects because, especially with blogs, I mean, like, okay, so I created a blog, now nobody visits. It's like for the first 3 months you have no visitors. And that can be a really, really frustrating situation. However, if there's a place where meritocracy works, is on the internet. So hard work is respected, is appreciated, even if you don't have much talent, even if you're not the best infographic designer in the world. If you work hard, if you publish 50 posts per day, people will respect that, and they actually will be very open to that effort and to any sort of invitation that you make. Failure is free, success comes with a price. This is interesting because I told you that I began with Tumblr, Visualoop, and I kept Tumblr running, Visualoop on Tumblr, until they deleted my account. And of course, that it is a free platform, so there's this risk, no matter what you do on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever platform you're using, it's free, rules can change, accidents can happen, and if you put all your chips on a free platform, well, you probably will fail at some point, either by your fault or because you're not respecting the community and investing on a space that is yours and therefore theirs as well, or either because something happens like Orkut closed and so many other networks, social networks that during this time we saw coming to an end. And at that point, all the effort that you have put in there goes away. Okay, you can download some of the information of some of the content that you have there, but you need to invest if you want to be successful. And that sometimes is very hard because, I mean, to jump from a hobby to a professional thing, it really changes your mindset. But, I mean, if you want to be successful, you have to make that sort of investment at some point. So, timing also is very important. I learned that if I try to launch Visualoop today, I will probably miss all that explosion of infographics that happened at that precise time back in 2009, 2010. So if you're planning some sort of social media or digital marketing action, be aware of the timing of that action. Be aware of trends, be aware of what's happening, what are people talking about, and that goes on a micro level. That also goes on a very, very broad sense, like was the case of infographics. I was not concerned about if it was infographics about pet shops or dentists or whatever. I was just thinking about the way people are exchanging information, and at that point, to create something that helps that spreading of information really, really make the difference. So again, this is another lesson that I learned. And the most important of those lessons, for my opinion, is not, like I told you, not the fact of being number one, but trying to be unique. Unique in the sense that you are fulfilling a void in that community. You are offering something that it really adds value to the discussions. And of course, being unique doesn't mean that you are necessarily useful. So please think about what you are doing and if it's really helping and it's adding to the community, to the discussions, to the development of some field that you or your clients are working on. So those are the quick 5 lessons that I would like to share with you guys. I make this very, very short presentation because usually I speak too much and my time always passes. So I really want to give you guys the chance to talk and make questions. I'm sure there's so many different backgrounds here. And I deliberately avoided the infographic and visualization trends, things a bit more technical. I think if any of you guys want to talk about that, I can surely add something to that. But basically, this is what I wanted to share for you as a broader audience in terms of what I've learned and the things that can happen when you're like 40 years old and decide to have a blog. So it's not impossible, and if you put your heart on it and if you really work on it, it's really, really probable that it will make still a bank. Blogging is not there, so invest in blogging if you guys have the time. Have the discipline to do it. Try to make it something that's not just about yourselves, but it's about something that you care for, something that you like, and things will happen naturally. Okay? And this is it. Thank you. Okay, so my part of the conversation of this meetup is done. Now it's up to you. Please feel free to ask. I think it's my time to have a beer as well. So, please.
Sure. So it's what was the traffic that you had on the end of the Tumblr, and what's the traffic now, like approximately?
Okay, okay, I will not, yeah, okay, so basically Tumblr had a really good traffic. Tumblr had a problem in terms of, to be a bit more technical. So Tumblr is not very well seen by Google in terms of search engine optimization. So another problem if you opt for a free platform is that you'll be feeding Tumblr in terms of all the value of that work and that content that you put in. So at that time at Tumblr, I was with about like almost 1,500 visitors per day. It depended. Sometimes it would go even higher, and now we are like trying to double that if you think about that's 2 websites. Okay. The fact that I created 2 websites is because when you think about the community, especially if you're a global brand, you have to understand that despite the universal concepts, there are local characteristics and specificities that you have to respect and actually take value out of it. So basically, if you're working for a brand that has a global reach, there are a lot of opportunities at the local level. So the social media guys say, think global, act local. That's basically a motto. And that's why I also created a Tumblr back then in Portuguese, where I only posted infographics in Portuguese. Now Visualoop.com and Visualoop.com-br, they have different contents, editorial contents. It's not a translation, a direct translation, precisely because I try to get the local content as well. So when you think about traffic, don't always think about the global traffic. The only web metric that counts at that point is the quality of the relationships that you have. And that's not a visible metric, okay? And you see many of the mediums today, newspapers and everything, they're still trying to understand how they will measure the success of their own online presence. Because to measure it in terms of page views or in terms of those traditional metrics, it undermines and underestimates really the quality of the reader and the quality of the audience. So it's an important metric in terms of understanding if your website is successful or not, but it really depends, because if it's something on a niche level, what is really important is that if you write to the New York Times, that they answer you back. That's what's really important to me at this point. Not if I have a lot of readers, because I understand in the case of Visualoop that it's still a niche, despite the growth of the interest in infographic design. It's still something of a niche. And there's a long way to go, and what really, really matters is if you have access to the guys that are pushing forward this field. And applying that to any other field. So if you're doing something related with pet shops, you probably want to have the guys that train the dogs and publish books to give you an interview, because that is what really your audience is looking for. Not only the pretty pictures of dogs and cats that you see all over the place, but real content. Okay.
I have a question about community. How would you define your community or describe visual community? And then how long did it take you to understand this, that this is your community?
Yeah, well, it was really, really a process. It was nothing that you were given to, so yeah, I had to learn that. Basically, what I understood is that data visualization and infographics, it's a huge common denominator to a lot of tribes that are spread around the internet. So you have the visual journalism community, which is usually very strong on Twitter and all. Then you have the business intelligence and business analytics community that's more focused on big data and those kinds of topics. Then you have the scientific communication community, that also makes use of graphics and charts. Then you have the cartography community, which is a community by itself. So basically, the opportunity that I saw from that transition from Tumblr to a more professional website with my own domain was precisely understanding that there's no place for all those communities to share their experience. So at this point, Visualoop defines itself as a digital environment for all things visualization related. And that actually brings several communities that were already there and continue to have their own blogs, their own spaces, to a completely new space. And it's kind of interesting to see that in real life, not only online, those communities are already interacting among themselves. So you have like folks from coding and distribution will help shape that community by itself. And that's what I mean when I'm saying that you should try to be useful, try to add something to the community. In the case of Visualoop, was to offer a space where those separate communities could interact and where folks could actually meet and at a certain point get to know the work that is being done in other fields. And then we have several nice examples of that, of folks that have actually published guest posts, and because of that they got job offerings and stuff like that. So it's nice to have that sort of real life feedback. It's not something that you identify the community, you identify the void for the community. Okay? Identify what is missing, what's missing here. And that's basically a good part of the success of Visualoop. So to think of it as an audience, as a reader, the world's top infographic designer in newspapers is a Spanish guy called Jaime Serra. He was elected a couple of years ago as the most influenced infographic designer for the past 2 decades. And he says that notion of a reader or one person, it's a false question. You have to understand that each person has its own way of thinking, each person has its own opinion on subjects, and to try to downsize all of that to one block, to one profile, is getting harder and harder. I mean, we have access to so many things, so many information, so many. We are all modern Da Vinci's. We all have different tastes. Some like to draw, like music, like to study something, learn something. I learn something every day. And it's very hard from a marketing standpoint to deal with that, because that's the old media. The old media looks at the reader, the viewer, like in the single. And the internet is changing that drastically. And one of the things that we heard, we were like last week on the world's top infographic event, and everybody was saying, don't underestimate your audience. Respect the fact that they're much more complex and much more complete than what marketing makes you understand. And that's why in the beginning I told you, it's people. It's not about technology. It's for you to understand people. In many sense, I think a good waiter is the perfect social media manager. So yes, it's the guy that knows what's happening. He doesn't get too intrusive, but he always knows when to fill your cup. He always knows when to be there, even when you're not looking at it. So yeah, it's almost an invisible work, more than to try to put all the audience together and do one thing for all of them. It's alive. It's alive. The community. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
You have mentioned about this slide in the Google Trends. Like you showed that right now it's really nice. You can see that the trend from 2009 2010 has grown, but at that point in 2009 and 2010, how you actually decided that this is the
because the graphic, of course, the screenshot was made now.
Yes.
So now the curve is even more accentuated. Back then it was already growing. So when you look at the graphic in 2009, the line was really jumping. The surge was really, really getting high on it. So, and most of all, when you start trying to understand the community, this means to browse through a lot of digital environment, social media channels, with a purpose. So if you want to understand, I wasn't using Facebook or all those social networks to promote myself or to procrastinate. I was actually trying to understand what people were doing. And once you try to do that, their favorite ways of sharing content really appear. And in those digital environments, it became very, very clear that the major shift on the internet, as we get more bandwidth and more open access, is that we were shifting from a text-based internet to a visual internet, where images were becoming more popular than text. Now, images back then were very hard to share because you had limited bandwidth in many places. As that changes and evolves, and smartphones, I mean, we're talking about 2010, there was no iPhone, there was no iPad, there was nothing like that. So it's something that was really, at the time, the landscape, the online landscape was different. And that's why when we started to see those visual pieces, they become very, very popular because actually there's a bit of science behind that. You know, our brain is much more prepared to absorb an image than text. And I think all of you probably agree with that. I mean, nobody reads today. People scan, they don't read. Yeah, okay. But yes, so it's something that even, and it came to prove correct because you saw the curve and it's still going up. So yes, it was a timing, but also it was the perception of, okay, this is something natural that will only grow because, first of all, our brain is geared up to that. I mean, we were painting cave walls before writing. So, and cave paintings in some sense are nothing more than infographics, explaining how you should hunt, explaining several situations from your daily routine. So yeah, so it was a research, so it was not, infographics, like this. It wasn't by chance. It was really understanding that, okay, people are using this. Back then there were like a couple of blogs doing that sort of curating, but like one post every day or something like that. So imagine when suddenly 50 every day, in a sense that it really blew a lot of people's mind. And then you started to do your homework. I didn't go into details, but you have to, if you want to promote, that's another session, but if you want to promote your website, so then you have to go and start doing exactly the same thing as you do when you get to a wedding party and you don't know anybody. Okay, you just walk around and you listen to people, what they are saying, and until you get to a place where, okay, this conversation interests me. Hi, and then you start to connect with people. So it's not only about you writing and posting things, but also to be listening to what's going on in your field. And there were actually several major moments on Visualoop history that helped to grow that community. So comments on blogs, that was, and it still is a big thing. So thanks to a comment on one blog, Inspired Magazine, I got the invitation to become a guest writer. And through that, I managed to have a much bigger audience because Inspired Magazine was like, at the time, 200 followers on Twitter, 200,000 followers on Twitter at the time. So it was really big, and it was all due to a comment. One comment on the right post on the right website. And commenting, like everything else, you have to add value. If you just write first, I mean, that's not really adding any value to the conversation. But at that point, there were a lot of posts because it was something trendy. There were a lot of posts like the top 10 websites to find infographics. So if I got to a post like that, hey guys, oh, I have a new website called visualoop.tumblr.com. I also collect infographics. Check it out. And it works. It really works. I got invited to do a couple of guest posts in several major blogs that really helped to promote the website. And that goes for, today it's much more consistent with, for instance, groups, Facebook communities, Facebook groups. That's also a good place to try to pitch in some of those situations, but always thinking not only to promote yourself, but to really add value to the conversation. Otherwise, at the wedding party, you'll be like that boring guy that only talks about himself, because I'm the best, and I'm this, and I'm that, and nobody wants to hear that from anybody. Okay, so if there's a good conversation going on, go, speak, but only if you really have something interesting to add to them. Otherwise, shut up and listen. Listen. That's fundamental in social media. Listen a lot.
Yeah, I have a question. Till what point were you the only person behind the because I assume that there were
5 minutes ago, when I last worked. Okay, of course, I have a lot of structure now and help from Infogram, this trip and organizing these things, but in hands-on, it's still just me working. And of course, all the support in terms of technology, hosting, that was a major help because I was dealing with all of that as well. So it really helps this kind of support that I'm getting now from Infogram. And at this point, it's important also to mention that a huge part of the content that I post on Visualoop, it's third-party content. So it's like guest posts, it's like interviews, it's like featured portfolios. So basically, I think the key aspect is that when you reach a certain level of respect among your community, doors open. And if you invite, hey, I saw this project you did, really cool. You want to write a guest post for our community? And 9 out of 10 times they say yes. And of course that speeds up the process of posting more things because you don't have to write and think about what you're writing that much. You're actually just formatting and editing sometimes content that others are sending to you. So that really is also important to mention at this point. So I don't write everything. I'm just like editing and writing part of the content. And that's also, when you have a blog, that's also a dream come true. I mean, to have other people writing for you, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's really cool to have that.
Maybe you can explain in brief why did Infogram acquire you actually, just so.
Well, okay. Again, I'm not at liberty to discuss many details, but I think at a certain point it makes sense for Infogram, which is a somewhat entry-level tool for data visualization for those who just want to create a quick chart or are just learning taking their first step into data visualization. To bridge that concept and all the work they have been doing with data literacy and the webinars and all that effort with the high-end blog. So it really helps to reach another crowd which is not necessarily the typical Infogram user, but it also adds a layer of credibility to the tool in terms of the effort they're doing for the community. So again, I think for Infogram was precisely what we are talking here about. It's, okay, let's help this effort this guy is doing to help out the community and help the community at a level that perhaps the tool, the product that we have is not suitable for them because they're all working in graphic tasks. And they all, I mean, we're talking about another level of users. So I think it bridged a lot in that effort, in that conceptual effort, in that data literacy and visual literacy effort that Infogram has been developed. Infogram actually launched Infogram.org a few months before.
Does this would be known by one particular vendor of infographics software? Does it somehow affect your credibility, perhaps?
That was the only demand. Yeah, that was the only demand.
Company for
We actually discussed that a lot, and we came up with a solution that has proved very, very good. We have actually an editorial board today, made of people that are really, really on top of the visualization world. So that helps to guarantee, to assure that our editorial policy continues completely independent. So basically, Visualoop is 110% independent from Infogram editorially wise. So there's no interference, there's no pushing Infogram or talking more about Infogram. Now, Infogram has its own blog as a solution, as a tool, as a company.
So that means that Infogram would get the same exposure on your blog and website, even in situations.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, it did. I actually, when I interviewed, yeah.
So why did they buy?
No, because first of all, you see that it has a mention to Infogram. So at this time, Visualoop is not ad supported. So you have a couple of banners to Infogram just to point out that they are involved in the process. But the biggest value, like I said, is throughout the Infogram.org branch of Infogram, which is a non-profit branch responsible for making webinars and hackathons and several events, to which Visualoop ends up helping in terms of the connections with the right people you can make. So there's definitely an advantage out of that, but it's on that. It's not in terms of business. It's not in terms of having more Infogram users at this point. Yeah, it's more about getting in touch with the whole spectrum of the community. Not only those who are starting or are teaching visualization and need some simpler tools, but also among those who can actually, for instance, give a webinar about visualization or be part of an event that Infogram is supporting. So it's a community project. But then you have all of these that can answer all those questions as well. Okay.
How did you realize that you want to work with infographics, and what tools did you use then and now?
Okay, so it's important to say as well, I don't do infographics. I never sold services as infographic designer. That's one of the major reasons why we managed to have access to so many different people and even newsrooms, because I was not competing with no one. I'm not competing with the freelance guy, not competing with the visual journalist guy. So in terms of tools to produce infographics, of course I've seen a lot of changes, and they are still appearing. It's like almost every week you see a new tool or some sort of tool to help create visualizations. But I don't deal with any of them at the professional level. But there have been some amazing developments throughout this time. I mean, we're talking from a time where you had Excel, Tableau was not even a thing at that time. So from then to today, it's been a huge explosion, And of course, you see that for instance, like D3GS, it's something that has been all over the place. But then we go into a more technical side, which I don't know if it's so interesting at this audience. But yeah, you have a huge range of charting tools and other publishing tools, and you have Excel, which is still the most widely spread in charting tool worldwide. So that didn't change a lot. A lot of people still uses Excel. to create some of the visualizations, and then they go to the coding part. So they test the charts, they play with the data in an environment such as Excel, and then after they found out the connections or the line of thought they want to develop, then they move to their own working environments or to their own programming environments. So that's what I've seen. That's what I'm seeing at this point.
And how did you realize that you?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, the fact, yes. Well, now it's easier, like Steve Jobs said, it's easier to see the dots connecting at some point. My mother is a biology teacher, so I spent all my childhood with scientific illustrations and diagrams and all sorts of visual depictions of science phenomena. That surely had an influence. I also like to draw as well, even if I didn't have any artistic background. So basically there was something already inside of me, a bit like I told you about the brain being geared up for that visual content. Then the need to pay my bills with social media marketing. So again, I started to see that infographics and that kind of content was really something that was worth following. So I never produced infographics, but I sure recommended them a lot to a lot of folks. Most of my clients actually were agencies, so I never competed with them. I didn't do any design. I did the content part, which is something they usually don't like. And so at that point, as soon as I saw that it was not only something that I liked, but it's something that was growing as a human form of sharing information, I had no questions that I should continue. But again, not for me, but from a community. It comes to a point where you have the responsibility towards the community. Again, do not underestimate. If you have like 1,000 followers of something, that's a huge number. Especially if it's not about what you're eating or where you're traveling. If it's something real about that's useful. Okay, so yeah, I felt some sense of responsibility towards that community.
Maybe another one.
Yeah.
We've established that the term infographic is growing and is very popular. Have you maybe found out that it's become too popular because maybe you have some funny stories? We had once a client who came to us, we need an infographic, and it took us about 3 days of negotiations to understand that they actually need a website.
Yeah.
With user login,
Absolutely.
so they call it an infographic, and then I had to explain that it's not really an infographic.
Yes, and I mean that's a big question today, especially in the journalistic world, because somehow the term infographic has been hijacked by PR companies and marketing companies overall, and people really don't have a good idea that infographics and information design has been around for so much longer than speech. Okay, so yes, there's this misconception, but it's because it's very new. So you see that's why visual literacy and data literacy is so important, because as soon as the audience gets to be more critical about what the information they're consuming, those types of clients will no longer appear, because you'll have a lot of examples.
I agree.
Yeah.
But do you personally think that, for example, a blog post with a single chart in the middle explaining something is an infographic?
Well, that's a real broad question. Infographic, by definition, tends to inform. What we see a lot as bad examples of infographics is basically those mistakes in terms of bad information, bad sources. I'm not even talking about aesthetics. I'm not even talking about design. But you have to convey some sort of message, and that message has to be coherent and has to be credible. So when you have your facts wrong, when you have